partner verbal prompting, partner communication.
My thing is I only follow the person who technically has the floor.
Yeah.
So if you have something great, you better repeat it.
Okay, cool.
We have a video camera in the room. Is that okay with all three of you?
That's you guys.
Okay.
Yep. And you guys are fine with phone as time is.
Yeah, usually it's easy to tell if you're trying to Google something.
I'm just trying to brave
Staring
control
at it.
it. So.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for being here. Let's get down to it. Oh, wow, my timer's so long. One second. I was trying to go for 8 minutes. All right. Okay. So the resolution that we have today is that the United States federal government will provide military aid to the Syrian rebels. First is going to be the resolutional analysis, or the framework. This is going to be an all-inclusive policy net benefits round, because that allows both teams access to the debate and allows for the most predictable methods of refutation and burdens of proof. Going on, background one is background one. Center for the International Stabilization and Recovery stated that their main concern in protecting rebels. For protecting rebels and refugees is the landmines that are currently on the border and being deployed as we speak by the Syrian government. Two, the Gambian rats are a division in the U.S. Army and are trained by the U.S. Army Research Laboratory and are used by the military to be sent out to other conflicts that involve other nations. Three, the Syrian government, like I said, is constantly laying landmines. I'll get into more numbers later. First, we're going to go to plan text. One, the USFG, by an act of Congress signed by the President, will send the Gambian Rat Division of the military into Syria to help aid the rebels and also the refugees. And the rebels and refugees will, refugees are considered as rebels by the government. So if they're trying to flee, they're also considered a rebellious force. So it's all encompassing, yes.
Can you read just the mandate itself for me again?
Yeah. The USFG, by an act of Congress signed by the President, will send in the Gambian Rat Division of the U.S. Army.
Okay, and that's it. And the other stuff is just definition stuff?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I'll be referring to the rebels and the refugees, but refugees are classified as rebels by the government, so we are aiding both of them. Okay, so the solvency here, one, the Gambian rats detect tuberculosis in Syrian refugees Syrian refugees have a high infection rate of TB. This is cited by the Jordan Times. Two, it only takes 9 months to train them, and we already have a ton of trained rats, so they are able to be deployed immediately. But it also takes a very short time to train them and their owners, and the people who take them in are soldiers of the U.S. military. So it's soldiers of the U.S. military go with them over to Syria. So the third part here, hold on, at the bottom. The third part here is that each rat can screen thousands of patients for TB. 2,984 landmines were found and neutralized by these rats in Mozambique alone. Subpoint A under this is 662 were found in Thailand and neutralized. 500 solvency is that 1,046 bombs were found and destroyed in Mozambique, and 876 in Thailand by these Gambian rats alone, yes.
So you're sending soldiers as well as the rats, right?
Yeah, but the soldiers don't go out into the landmine fields with them. They go to Syria with them to take care of them, but then the Gambian rats go out there.
Okay.
So you're not sending the soldiers into the landmines.
How many soldiers?
How many soldiers?
Yes, that's really nice.
I mean, the soldiers isn't really relevant because they can, one soldier can take care of hundreds of rats. So, I mean, you're going to send, maybe 10.
10 soldiers.
Okay. So the advantage one is that we save children. 420,000 people have been killed by these landmines on the Syrian borders alone. Two, the CISA, which was in my uniqueness, says that these are the biggest threat to small children, but also a huge threat to the people themselves. Three under this is 200 landmines were left on the Turkish border when the Syrian government left just recently. So even when they go away, they're still leaving these landmines. The link is that the plan passes and that we go in there and like we said in our solvency block, we're going to be able to remove all of these landmines. They do this by just sniffing them out. The rats are trained. They can smell really well. Internal link one, this removes all landmines with absolutely no death. Because the rats are trained to sniff them, but they do not blow them up because they're so light. And two, the rebels don't get blown up by the landmines anymore, which is going to aid them directly because when you have more rebel forces and when they're not worrying about the landmines in the battlefield, then they are able to have a better effort at rebelling against the government because the government knows where these landmines are and the rebels don't, and this is a direct impact on them. This is killing thousands of rebels, which is hurting their entire revolt, and with these people, they're going to be able to help overthrow the regime. So it's a direct aid to them because you're aiding them by not having thousands of their people killed off by the government. So impact one, this saves hundreds of thousands of lives for the rebels and the refugees, for thousands of children. And it also like saves a lot of children from like the dehumanizing effects of when they're trying to like flee the country. Their parents are getting killed and then they're winding up over there, and all of a sudden they have no parents, and now you have like a bunch of little children who are stuck in a brand new country who have nothing to do, like nowhere to go. They're like scared for their lives. They're out of their home country. They don't have any parents. They have nothing. Like they only have like systems to help like fend for them, which is like uniquely dehumanizing to be a refugee with absolutely like no structure around you and be like a little kid who has absolutely no like guidance whatsoever, or like no one to help them except for like strangers and people that they don't know. Going on to Advantage 2, tagline, solve tuberculosis, I guess, for the refugees. Uniqueness 1, the cross-apply a lot of the solvency stuff. 1, they detect tuberculosis, and they detect tuberculosis. 2, each rat can detect up to 1,000 patients. 3, or like thousands of patients, sorry. Each rat can detect thousands of patients because their smelling never goes bad. They can smell the virus of TB or like running through your blood. And 3, the Syrian refugees and rebels have very high infection rates because they don't have like much medical support, and they like, first off, they can't detect it, and like the biggest issue of dying of TB is the fact that they can't detect the TB, and like they're like getting fatally ill and they're just dying off because they have absolutely no help because no one really knows what's going on until it's way too late. So these rats will help prevent that. Link the plan passes, the rats can detect this in early enough stages to get them treatment and to get them help so it doesn't become a terminal condition. Internal link, 1, this treats the Syrian refugees and the rebels, which means that you're aiding the rebels directly because you're going to have more rebels who aren't dying fatally ill who are going to be able to fight the cause and go against the government, which is what we're supporting. And impacts, once again, you're saving thousands of people from tuberculosis, from dying of this illness that is just simply going undetected. All of these rats can fall back for all of this. So what you're going to be looking at today is the fact that we have massive impacts on the amounts of deaths. There are hundreds of thousands of people dying from each of these conditions. When you combine those together, we're saving at least 1 million lives here. And when you're saving that many lives, you're going to be directly aiding the rebels because you're helping them get the type of treatment that they need. You're helping them to be able to actually fight against the government, to give them a chance, at least try to equalize the ground somewhat compared to the restrictive regime that they are facing right now. So the U.S. military will be directly aiding the rebels. Thank you.
Where do I start?
Interpretation.
You're up. You're up.
Okay, no, yeah, makes sense.
It's pretty much verbatim.
Yeah, I got it. Okay.
How many offs?
Good question. I'm gonna start with, I hate to do this, but I think I'm gonna have to start with theory at the top. And then I'm going to go on, and then, I don't know, it sort of depends on how much time I have left, but either 1 or 2 off.
Let's take it first before you
Yeah.
start.
Cool.
So are you putting your off at the end? You're going to go on case and then go create your new on case positions?
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, just to be clear, it's off, on, off, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm coughing.
Okay. All ready? Cool. So starting off at the top of the case, we accept the definitions, we accept the fact that this is a policy resolution, but we do have a couple of refutations to make at the top of the case. Specifically, I'm sorry to have to do this to you guys today, but like we're gonna have to say that they're being non-topical. And like I know like this is sort of a detestable thing for me to do in Marley. This is the first time I've ever actually had to run a T, but I actually think that they're in pretty clear violation. So specifically this is an effects topicality, so let me read some stuff off to you. So interpretation, the resolution clearly asks the AF to provide military aid for the Syrian rebels in cooperation. This is
Yeah, in cooperation, not some side off that.
yeah. This is not like this is like some sort of like minor side operation about like sending a couple of like I don't even know how many rats, like probably thousands of rats, right? And then like 10 soldiers over. So they're
Like, the rhetoric coming out of the mouth is like it's
so yeah. So their rhetoric coming out of mouth says that it's like almost directly helping them, but that's not the same thing as like sending aid. Like I think that like whenever we look at this, it just doesn't make sense. The violation is that the affirmative team finds.
It does well.
Okay.
It's what they do.
Okay, like the affirmative team just like only sends over rats instead of like sending like weaponry or any sort of like reasonable thing for this, which get me right into the standards. So like with the predictability standard, like we're sending over rats to Syria. Like, I think nobody in the round expected this. Like, good on you guys for coming up with something that we were completely unprepared for. But on the other hand, this means that like my partner and I don't have like any sort of substantive evidence to present on a lot of issues. So I like just using like a basic baseline of predictability standard. The fact is that like attaching onto that like a common man standard. Like, I mean, just all of us talking in this room generally, when you say the word like military aid, you're not going to think about rats being sent over. You're going to think about weapons. You're going to think about tanks. You're going to think about like even non-lethal aid. Moving on to the literature standard, the resolution says directly help them, not to do something that by effect helps them, but actually they have to be, in order to fulfill the resolution, they have to support the resolution on base. So what they're doing is they're indirectly, as an effect of what they're doing, they're going to be sending aid to the rebels, and they're going to be helping the rebels, but since their plan itself isn't directly sending the aid, it's non-topical. There's also ground because ground explosion, because by the violation, the effects T allows non-topical, and this allows them to have specific ground.
And allows them to dodge out of specific
Yeah, and this allows them to dodge out of specific advantages that my partner and I prepped, which made, like, I mean, we don't have to articulate abuse, but maybe if I have some time, I'll show you some of the stuff that we would have ran had we been able to. So the voter for this, like, to begin with, is education, because of the time that we're currently wasting on the T. And like, I'm sorry that we have to do this, but we sort of do to prevent them from doing this in the future. And it also like, so it also like deters the possibility of future debater by reducing the amount of education that's being spread by debate. More people aren't going to enter debate. I love debate as an activity, and I want more debaters to be part of it. But the fact is that because of stuff like this, people don't join. And fairness, like, this is just not fair. It's pretty abusive. I've spent like 3 minutes talking about this already. And of course, like, as a topicality, this has to be voted on before you vote on anything else, and it's yes or no. Either they are being topical, or as in this case, they are only being effects topical, which is a form of non-topicality. So you have to just vote them down on this. But even if you don't buy all of this beautiful argumentation, let me show you why they don't have the offense that they claim that they have on the case. So let's start off by talking about like how this saves children because people die from landmines. So I'm going to refute the fact that like the landmines are the primary cause of death within Syria. Like, I think we all know that that's just straight up not true. Like, there are a lot of human rights abuses going on in Syria right now. There are tanks in the streets, there are people that are shooting with guns, and you guys are talking about like landmines on the Turkish border. Like, okay, this might be to some degree an issue, but the fact is that like with your saving the children point, it's just the magnitude is completely ridiculously small. So you're saying that this is like removing the landmines, but you didn't actually specify to us like how it's removing the landmines, right? You say these rats are going to sniff out the landmines, but landmine removal seems to not be part of it. It's just landmine detection. You say that rebels won't get blown up by the landmines, but like again, we don't know like how you're going to be getting these landmines out. We just know that we're going to be detecting them using these rats. And you say that Syrian rebels are going to be better at combating the government, but isn't the government, like, aren't the government troops also being affected by this? Which doesn't that mean that the government troops are also dying to the landmines? You know, like, you're saying that, like, the government troops know where it is, but if you've, like, ever engaged in any sort of military, like, operation, you know about the fact that there isn't always perfect communication. No, I'm 100% sure that not all of the Syrian troops know where all of the landmines are, and the fact is that actually we can put a turn here, because realistically, the Syrian troops are also being damaged by these landmines, and actually you're going to be helping the Syrian troops, because things like tanks are much more affected by landmines than are individuals, and the Syrian government obviously has more tanks than the Syrian rebels. So your impact is like that thousands of lives, I mean like hundreds of thousands of lives. I think we all know that's a complete exaggeration. Not hundreds of thousands of lives are being killed by these landmines. Talk about orphanization going on. I think that orphanization just straight up by itself is not dehumanizing, and I think that calling orphanization in and of itself dehumanizing weakens what it means to be dehumanized. Being dehumanized means that you're no longer treated as a human being. Like, you can't perceive yourself as a human being anymore. And like, I know a couple of people that are orphans, and like, let me tell you, they're like some of the most human people that I know. Like, they're not being dehumanized just straight up because they lose their parents. I mean, maybe, and if the member of government comes up and gives like some more like further explanation as to how they're being dehumanized, you can just completely ignore that because that's not part of the original argumentation that's being made. So you talk about TB, so I'm just going to do like just a straight solvency crest, like right up here at the top. I don't think that there is enough tuberculosis medicine in Syria that if they detected all of the cases of tuberculosis, they would be able to treat it. The fact is that all over the world, there's examples of tuberculosis being found and not treated. Additionally, lots of cases of tuberculosis are resistant to medicine. Tuberculosis is actually one of the most famous diseases to being medicine resistant, so even if you find all of these patients that have TB, that doesn't mean that you're going to be able to save their lives. So like these rats are going to be like detecting thousands of patients of lives. So again, we have to think about like the impact that these rats will have. So like again, I don't know how many rats they're sending in specifically because they don't specify, but I'm not really going to push on that. But basically for each rat that you have detecting tuberculosis in people, you're not saving people's lives with mines. So there's like an obvious trade-off being made. So you can't let them have massive magnitude on both of these, right? Either you have big magnitude on one or big magnitude on the other, and actually the fact is that the magnitude is pretty small on both because we can just like, we can cross-apply argumentation that was being used previously. You said that thousands of people die from tuberculosis, and like again, just the solvency press completely gets rid of that. Okay, it looks like I have time. Yes?
Tell me when you have spare time.
I have spare time right now.
Okay, so like just point out like the advantage too about lessening TB is exactly what we're talking about exploding ground. Like how what is that? What's that?
So like this tuberculosis thing, like this is not military aid. Like people with TB, yeah, some of them happen to be soldiers, but it's not like having TB is like you have a higher likelihood of having tuberculosis because you're a soldier, right? You just being in Syria has a high chance of TB. So this is completely non-topical, like this specifically. In addition, and this just points out to you how effects topical the entire case is. Moving on with my 45 seconds I have for the DA that I'm going to be presenting for you today, and that is that the United States taking further action within Syria will make Syria less able and willing to cooperate with the rebels within Switzerland right now. So the uniqueness is that right now the government and the Syrian opposition are currently cooperating within Switzerland, and they're actually like getting stuff done. The link is that the plan is going to make the Syrian government walk away from this. The internal link is that this means that the government is no longer going to be cooperating. The internal link to that is that the fighting is going to continue. The internal link to that is that people will continue to die in Syria. And again, I'd like to cross-apply my analysis that people die primarily not because of landmines within Syria, but because of tanks, guns, and other things being used by the government. Thank you.
I'll go same order.
Okay, let me make sure that I have like my own order down. Topicality on case, off case.
Yeah, well, I mean, I flow topicality off case, but yeah, the topicality would be my first position.
Yeah, okay. I just like having sorry.
And yeah, so yeah, same order.
Cool.
You did that.
Yeah.
Okay. Opponents ready?
Yes.
Judges? All right then. All right, first of all, I'd like to start off with responding to the topicality. My opponents put explain that our effects topical in this case. So first of all, the interpretation is that we provide military aid for like the Syrian rebels. Like first of all, I'd like to provide the counter. Well, I think this like needs a counter interpretation. Like obviously, like we're providing military aid to Syrian rebels. Like you can look at the fact that like we're giving them like advisors and soldiers and rats that like can help like remove landmines. Which these landmines are an act of war right now, and so those like are clearly like aiding the Syrian rebels. It was military aid when we did it in Vietnam to go and like provide advisors and stuff. It was like military aid, and then it's military aid now in protection time. And so like when we're providing this military aid, like we're like this is clearly military aid. But let's look down to the standards. The first standard my opponents give is predictability. I'd like to point out that like the Times Magazine, like one of their leading issues, one of their like headlines was Gambian rats able to solve for landmines. We also have Huffington Post talking about like Gambian rats solving for the landmines that the Syrian army has recently started putting between the borders. Of course, there's also the old landmines over there as well, making it an extremely dangerous situation. This is all over the news. It is extremely predictable. I've seen Gambian rats and landmines run in several debates before. It's a very predictable resolution. The second standard they give is like a common usage, and they say that like people like think often of like weapons and tanks when they think of like military aid, and they themselves said like other aid would be like even fine, like just regular aid with military aid, and like even though they're supposed to give military aid, but anyways, as far as the common usage goes, like I've seen like this is first of all like. As I said before, this is something that has been run into the debate community in the past. It's actually like something that's been talked about in the debate community, and so this is something that like is commonly used. Like we commonly talk about Gambian rats. The third stand they give is like the resolution. Like we can't by effect help them. We have to immediately help them, and we do. We're giving them the rats that can go and do stuff. It would be like saying that we're going to just send in soldiers, and the soldiers are going to go out and kill people. And we're like, that's not aid because the soldiers actually have to go there and then kill people, and that's the aid. Like in what case then can we pass a resolution or pass a plan that is immediately resolutional? Like these rats go there and then help the rebel forces. Like that is immediately resolutional. The fourth standard they give you is ground, and they say that like we can dodge out of specific specific advantage, dodge out a specific disadvantage, I think is what they're gonna say. Like talking about like there's like basically there's a huge ground loss, but like one, they give you a DA, they don't have time to address the DA, but they have a disadvantage, as well as the fact that there are like off-case arguments. They do have on-case arguments. The ground like doesn't flow through. This is like a huge hot-button issue. There's obviously controversy around it, or else you'd be using it everywhere.
They always have counterplans.
Oh, and there's always, yeah, big one, there's always counterplan. Like a counterplan option for them would have been a great route for them to get a lot of ground, but they didn't go with it. Moving on to the voters. So the voter here is education. Well, okay, top priority is saying you should vote here first, and yeah, that's how teams work, but they're saying education. Like, we're wasting time on team unless people enter debate. I know that I personally probably would have been pretty, like, enter debate as soon as possible. I heard something awesome like Gambian rats going out into Syria and like solving and like sniffing out landmines, but like, education is like not hurting the round, because if this is something that caught you guys off guard, then we're obviously providing a lot of education, because now this is like something that not a lot of people know about. But we also have like your standards rely on, like your standard of education relies on predictability for you to come up with responses to this. But this was like, as I said, like a huge Time magazine article. This was also a huge article in the Huffington Post. Like this is, you know, all over the news. And so like most of your standards don't flow through. Anything else, Lindsay?
No.
All right then. On to top of case, they don't classify, they don't really do anything top of case, let's go straight to the advantage. Okay, on the advantage, we talk about like the landmines are not the primary cause of death in Syria, like even if they're not the primary cause of death, they're still a big cause of death, so we probably wouldn't stop it, like less death is better, and I mean if you don't have a counterplan to solve for more death, that means that less death is better than the status quo. Then they say like we don't specify like how they remove the landmines, and here's how they remove the landmines so everybody's clear. The rats sniff them out, or go run around sniffing. They find a landmine, they stop, they start digging at the ground. That's when their trainer knows they find a landmine. They then call the rat back and they give them a treat, and then they can dismantle the landmine. There's several ways to do that. They can either force it to trigger, or they can dig around it and trigger it from underneath, or take it apart from underneath. These are the two ways that landmines are disabled. That's how the process works. Yes.
So can you specify to me where in your plan text do you specifically say you're going to send military advisors, including people who train rats, and the rats?
That was exactly what my partner stated for you. Where was the exact plan text you have?
I went into it when they asked the POI. I said that.
Okay, the POIs are binding. We answered in the POI. We've given you reasons. We've told you that we're going to send military advisors, and like the trained soldiers, that like the keepers of these rats, and they go into the country and they help. They guide the rats. We gave you all this in the POI, and it was like explaining the planks of our plan.
Clarify, because they might be thinking that I said that the soldiers like never touch landmines. I said that like they're not part of the detection.
The soldiers are not part of the detection. They just send the rats out and then bait them back. That's where the clarification comes in. The soldiers' role is like send them out, have them come back, and then they can they can dismantle the landmine. But the rat's job is to go out and just find the landmine. That's like the biggest part of landmine safety is finding the landmine first. It's key, because I played Minesweeper. I know this. Then they say that Syrian troops don't know where the mines are, and that's why we're sending the rats. And then they also talk about the Syrian army could be these mines be working against them as well. A small amount of the mines can be, yes, if the mines that were there from previous instances, but a lot of the landmines being placed now are being placed by the Syrian army on these borders to stop rebels from getting guns flown through the borders. It's mostly to stop the gun trade, but as well there was a backlash that is also killing refugees, which the Syrian army probably isn't too concerned about, because as he explained for you, they classify refugees as rebels as well. And so because of that, we have a situation where the Syrian army is probably not as effective by these because they're the ones planting them. Then they say that being orphaned isn't dehumanizing. What we're talking about uniquely is being orphaned while fleeing to another country, then being orphaned, trying to get into one of those Jordan refugee camps, and now you're there alone as a child, in this foreign area that you know nothing about, and there's all these people around you that are in this huge dehumanizing situation, your home's gone and being blown up by war. That is where it becomes uniquely dehumanizing. That is where we gain the orphanage to you. Okay, anything else before we move on to the next one? Okay, on advantage 2. Then they talk about there's not enough medicine in Syria to save the people, even if we were able to detect all these cases of tuberculosis. But tuberculosis treatment is really cheap. If you look at those commercials of the people in Africa, they play that really sad music, and then they say oh, for just $1 a day, here's the impacts you could have. For just a dollar, they advertise it's $1, you can cure someone with tuberculosis. Tuberculosis is something that's cheap to cure. The problem with tuberculosis is that it's really hard to detect. the rats being there, they would be able to utilize these rats while they weren't hunting down landmines to detect tuberculosis. And as we explained, a single rat can detect thousands of cases of tuberculosis. And they say like there's not enough rats to solve both issues, and like the rats aren't always like specific for landmines. Like these rats have can be used for other functions as well. And so like the rats are going to be doing both things in help for tuberculosis. And they say like it's not military aid like for the tuberculosis, and like it's. Like the rats, like us sending them there, like they're obviously like we're going to send them there for multiple things. They send their own topicality issue, like that we could send other forms of aid, like humanitarian aid as well. They mentioned something like that, and so like we still like garner that.
There's thousands of rats.
And there's thousands of rats. Okay, so moving on to the like off case, they give you like one quick DA, and like Russia is only mad about sending weapons, like not rats. So like Russia doesn't play this, but as well as like Syria, like coming to these talks. And the talks we've already tried several talks in the past, and they all have ended in failure. Right now, the talks are not set. They set the U table, so the two forces don't have to look at each other. They can just look at the mediator. These talks are failing, and they will fail. There's no uniqueness. These talks cannot have solvency. So that's why like. You know, with that, if they can't claim solvency off this, off of the talks, and there's no disadvantage there.
I assume you want to speak over.
Yeah, I do. Do you have your water bottle by any chance?
No, I don't.
Damn you.
Shut you.
No, don't whatever.
Austin, do you have water by any chance?
No.
Alright, so.
Can you give me a phone? Judges? So nice. Okay. Okay. Cool. Fine. Oh. Anyways, judges, are you ready? Audience, are you ready?
No.
I assume you're ready.
Yeah.
Okay, by the way. You guys ready? That's nice to hear. Anyways. Ready, set, go. So let's talk about the nature of the topicality. So first of all, like they do agree that this is a priori because my opponent says at the bottom you look into this argument at first. But let's talk about the nature of the topicality. The nature of the topicality basically says that as long as we have one of our standards that links to the voters, which by the way that they drop fairness. So like as long as we gain access to fairness, as a voter, we're instantly winning the round because again this is a priori issue. So let's look to the first argumentation. First argumentation is about how we're also sending advisors. Like I asked an PI for that specific phrase in the plan text which says that they're going to send advisors. Nowhere did they actually send they're going to send advisors. When we asked the POI, they only say two things. They're going to send people who have trained rats, and they're going to send over rats. Nowhere did they say that they're going to send military advisors. So not only is this like a moving target abuse, so which means that there's more abuse coming off an argument from the opposition saying that they're already abusing us. But I'll talk about that later. They're also not good. They don't actually meet the interpretation. Which means since they're not meeting the interpretation, you're still really looking to our standards, and you look to our standards. So like they talk about our standards a lot, but one of the standards they fundamentally miss is the literature standard. I think they might have misconstrued this as a common knowledge standard or whatever standard they misconstrued it as, but they cleanly drop the literature standard because they're dropping the literature standard, which is intrinsically linked to the fairness voter, will automatically winning the round on an a priori issue, and their arguments don't even matter at this point. Because that's what an a priori issue is. Because look, at the end of the day, we have analysis of what the literature of the resolution specifically says to help to directly on face the affirmative needs to directly on face support the Syrian rebels on face. Like they need to fulfill it right away, not through effects. But again, like you're listening to like my opponent literally quotes out of their mouth. It's almost like we're directly helping them out of their own rhetoric of their mouth. When they describe how rats are going to help people, she sees every single piece of evidence and warrant I need to prove to you why they're being abusive. Second of all, okay, now let's talk about like voters. So like, on like education, they also dropped the analysis of why. We're not saying like, we're basically saying future debaters won't come, and which means we lose debaters, which means we lose education because they can't debate and they don't get educated. So they misunderstand that. So we actually get education too. And they also look into ground exposure. They drop the fundamental crux of the ground exposure standard, which is not that they get, which while it does include facts about like whether or not they can dodge out a specific argument, it specifically states that as the first part of the standard is that this grants them specific access to grounds that they did not have access to before if they were following a topical plan. And then this it cleanly links to advantage to about how like where does solving for TB come from in any topical place? No topical plan. No topical plan will ever solve for TB if you're setting military aid. This legitimately comes out where this is not predictable at all. This is cleanly extra-topical. This is exactly what we're saying when we say that there's ground exposure, when they're giving themselves access to arguments that they didn't have to in the first place. So let's move on. Those are all reasons why you're just instantly going to drop them before you get to case. So let's talk about solvency argumentation. So like all they basically say is they basically see to us also the solvency press that my partner says. They basically say rats the mines aren't doing a lot of damage, but as long as we basically save one person, we're doing good. Which means they basically ceded most of the solvency press to us that basically like as long as we prove that if your job is solely to save one person, as long as we prove that you hurt two, we automatically win the round, and we're going to show you how to do that. I don't know if I have enough time. Sorry.
It's just an organizational issue.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Okay, so like, are you putting that solvency press on our like whole solvency page, or are you just putting that on like the uniqueness of an advantage? Because that's confusing.
I have my solvency press at the top.
Yeah, that's just a solvency press that like attacks the whole plan. So also let's talk about the case turn. So basically the way they try to link out the case turn is that like, oh well, like this is also going to kill a lot of people. There's a lot of mines being placed by the military, and this is also killing refugees. Again, but what they're doing is they're missing the fundamental issue. The fundamental issue is that like the whole argument against the case turn is that like that since the Syrian government army is placing them, they know exactly where these mines are. They missed the fundamental crux of my partner's turn, in which says there's miscommunication in the Syrian army. Because there's miscommunications, they're going to hurt each other. Their whole reputation is basically contingent on whether or not the Syrian government's army does not have any miscommunication. Because if they don't have any miscommunication, they know exactly where every single landmine is. But again, they don't actually contest the fact that my partner's first argument, the main argument of this turn is that they don't have that perfect communication. And if they don't have that perfect communication, at least one of these landmines is going to hit at least one person or at least one tank, which means that this case turn still goes through. We checked back. The original analysis checks back for their argumentation. We easily have this link turn. Now let's talk about the case. So let's talk about case. So like, basically, for Advantage 1, they just tell the same story about orphans are being dehumanized. Like honestly, Judge, this sounds like the exact same argumentation that the PM is making. And you know what the problem about that is? Because when you're making the same old argumentation, you can't be possibly making new argumentation. When you're not making new argumentation, you can't actually refute the new arguments on the flow. When you're not refuting the new arguments on the flow, that means you cold hard concede Advantage 1 to us. You don't have any solvency because again, we're talking about like orphans are being dehumanized. We have an impact cut. Being orphanized is not the same thing as being dehumanized. They come up and just reiterate the same story. Because they're reiterating the same story, they cannot possibly be making new analysis, which is why it doesn't even matter. And again, like dehumanization doesn't even matter because they didn't tell you like how to weigh dehumanization, and I'm telling you dehumanization is very minuscule on the list of what happens. Death is actually more important. So like, okay, let's talk about Advantage 2. Like, the only response is that like commercials say $1 can save a life. Like, is your actual warrant a commercial? Because commercials don't have like this like common like trend to exaggerate stuff to get you to buy stuff. Like, is like legitimately like, are you trying to warrant are you trying to warrant your reputation with a commercial? Like that is clearly not the right way to go. Commercials are not good at like providing warrants. They almost nearly always exaggerate facts. This is not a good place to go. This provides no help to them. This is actually just kind of comical that you said it commercial. Like I mean, like I like Sarah McLachlan too, okay? But like that you're not gonna take this seriously. Which means yeah, and then also you look to the fact that Advantage 2 is basically how they're abusing us because like they're getting like this advantage way off topic, and that's what we're talking about when we say exploiting ground. So then let's talk about like the interpretation where like now somehow they have military advice. This is fundamentally abusive because like now I have to spend the rest of my time arguing this. Like we've been set back because it's military advisor. This shifting of argumentation is actually what allows them to like somehow meet the interpretation when they're not even meeting the interpretation in the first place. But somehow shifting the plan to also add the presence of military advisor is a shift in target to somehow avoid a separate argumentation, a second argument, which is the topicality. This is inherently abusive because of affirmative plan that is shifting ground. We don't know what to attack. We don't know how to attack it. This is inherently abusive. And they try to do that by saying, no, now that we have military advisors, now we're setting military aid. So first of all, they don't even meet the interpretation of the original topicality. Now they're coming up with the second argument that's also abusive by adding military advisors with a shift in advocacy, a shifting target, and there's no way for us to predict what they're going to pull out in the PMC. Because what they're trying to, what they're going, they could be doing anything. So on and so forth. And engage.
Thank you.
Okay, timer.
No,
No, I'll just do it no time.
Yeah.
Bump me if I miss something specifically on.
For sure.
Okay.
Let me see.
Close it. Quick off-time roadmap. I mean, like, it's my closing speech, so I'm gonna like start off by just hopping off on a couple of little things on the flow to remind you of some things that Sean said, and then I promise I'll get into the weighing stuff and let you know just why we won. Okay, so let me start off by saying that, like, normally I would hate to have to ask a judge to vote on T, but like we've just sort of been forced into this little corner here, and specifically, like, normally there's a refutation on T, so I won't even like spend too much time on it, but they failed to refute specifically two things on the T that means that it flows through, which means that you just like sort of have to vote for Anza on T here. Like, if you think that T exists at all, you have to grant us an FX T here. So like first, like my partner pointed out, you have to flow them through on the fairness, the fairness harm, because they didn't respond to it at all. He only talked about education, and then he also didn't like attack the literature standard at all, which means that you flow that through as well. So basically, the entire T flows through. Moving back,
They also don't meet the interpretation.
they also don't meet the interpretation. Moving back onto like the actual case that they presented and stuff. They failed to have any sort of argumentation in response to Rather, I'd like to remind you guys that basically she admits to the fact that there's a pretty low magnitude for this landmine saving children thing, so just like keep that in mind. And like my partner pointed out, their like dehumanization thing was just repeating what the PMC said, so there was no new argumentation there, so you might as well just flow that through there. And then on the tuberculosis point, like my partner Sean eloquently and I repeatedly point out to you that this is like perfectly demonstrating why we went on T. But anyway, let's get like right onto the voter issues. So I mean, like, obviously the first thing that I'm gonna have to ask you guys to vote on is T, and like I sort of already explained it to you, but let me just explain it to you again. With T, and specifically with the literature standard and fairness, like I mean just like read the resolution and then read what their plan is. Their plan is to send rats over. The resolution asks for military aid. I mean, yeah, it's an effect of sending the rats over that like indirectly it'll be helping the rebels, but military aid, like yeah, I said like some forms of non-lethal military aid, which by the way is not the same thing as humanitarian aid. Like if they were like, the United States is gonna send them like GPSs so that they can target their missile attacks, like I would have been cool with that. That would have been totally topical. But no, they're sending over rats, and there's lack of specificity on the case. There's like a lot of vagueness going on, so you have to start off by voting on T. But like I know that you as judges really don't want to vote on T, and you want to vote on like the real things. So let's I mean, yeah. So moving on to like the actual
They
case.
also have that abuse that comes out of MG for the interpretation, where they try to add military advisors.
Oh yeah, and then like the member of government just like randomly comes in there and says that not only are we sending rats and the soldiers, like the leader of the government originally, sorry, the prime minister originally said, he also said something about like about military advisors, which I hadn't heard before, and that's why I was trying to like raise a POI during protected time, because what military advisors doing what now, I don't even know. But sorry, let's move on to case so we have a bit more to talk about. So like let me just point out to you the fact that they have just basically zero magnitude. Like, just none at all. Orphans, they don't have any sort of refutation to my, like, being orphaned is not in and of itself dehumanizing. So what they have is, like, a couple of people dying from landmines. Like, again, I'd like to reiterate that landmines aren't actually the primary cause of death within Syria. And I'd like to reiterate for you again that actually landmines are more affecting the Syrian government than the Syrian rebel forces, because landmines... Yeah.
The term that he's now referring to was only articulated as Syrian government the troops will also die. He never said that the Syrian troops more of them will die than the rebels. It was only that some of them will die.
I said that the Syrians would be more damaged. That the government would be more damaged. But if you want, I can like avoid the phrasing of more Syrian government will die, but I specifically said like the government has more tanks than the rebels, and the tanks are primarily being blown up.
It's under consideration.
Yeah, I can't ask you guys to vote on it, so. Anything else to say, I guess?
No.
No? Okay. Cool. I have like 3:22 down, is that right? 43 seconds to go?
Yep.
Okay. Go. Alright, so getting back into it, like, they concede basically that there isn't like a whole, and we have a turn on this too, so we like actually have offense on that. And then like the TB thing you could just completely ignore because it's effects topical and you just like don't even need to
They
look at
warrant
it.
it with a commercial.
And they warrant like the fact that TB drugs are cheap with a commercial, like that's just completely ridiculous. But if we look at the DA that's just completely undercovered by my opponents, you can see that we just win on that because think about the magnitude of ending the Syrian war, weigh that against the magnitude of like people dying because of
Whatever.
landmines. Yeah.
This is like it's a shadow argument because the DA was entirely dropped out of the MO, so for him to like bring up the DA is completely shadowing and pulling through.
I mean, I don't agree because I think that my partner talked about it, but I'll let the judges look at the
And then that's second substitute again. Just go for it.
Are you saying continue?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I mean, like with my last 7 seconds, I'd just like to remind you guys that like the Syrian war has killed thousands, if not like tens of thousands of people, and that's not because of mines, yeah, and then a priori topicality.
This is not my pen.
A priori.
Okay.
This is not my pen.
Oh, yeah, this bad.
I'm gonna start on case.
Cool.
Advantage 1, you can ignore advantage 2. Doesn't matter. And I guess we'll have to touch DA now, and then we're gonna put effects T at the very bottom and have a good time with that one.
Wait, one more time. I have advantage 1.
DA, I guess, and then effects T. Alright, so we are clearly winning on advantage 1 here. All they say is that like we concede that landmines aren't a major death was isn't true at all. They dropped the entirety of our solvency and our background. That all checks back for this, where we're saying 420,000 people have died from this. So they say we have no magnitude. There's your magnitude.
Point of order. Like now, the cross application and using like his solvency block I've never seen before checks back somehow for our solvency block on, or like the link attacks on DA 81 is totally new. Like I have no idea where this comes from.
Your response?
It's my first chance to respond because they keep bringing this up, and our solvency has been here the whole debate. Solvency has been in the entire
I'm
debate.
sorry, you said it's your first chance to respond?
Well, the solvency has been in the entire debate that we've been pulling through our solvency block that I laid out.
Consideration.
Okay, so basically, like, where all of our solvency goes conceded, like, and the fact that, like, disadvantage, the first uniqueness point is 420,000 people have died, you're gonna see magnitude there alone. Like, okay, they say, like, landmines aren't major, but that's at best mitigation, where they're still conceding that, like, they are causing death. And where they are causing death, we're always gonna be net beneficial, and the fact that we are saving that. Going to the turn, they say, like, as he says in the point of order, he says that he's not going to articulate that the government is hurt more by these landmines. So all this turn does is mean that we save more lives. All this turn does is mean by like getting these landmines gone is that you're saving you're saving very few government troops, but a huge amount of rebels. So like their turn is basically like turn, they save more lives. So we're only going to be saving more lives with that turn. It's not a case turn whatsoever. It doesn't take away any of our advantages for the rebels. We're still going to be getting rid of the landmines, which they concede to. We'll be getting rid of landmines. So we will be getting our impacts. We'll always be getting that. They say orphanization is dehumanizing. They missed the total crux of this. They missed the entirety of this because it is unique because these are refugees. They never once referenced the fact that these are orphans that are in refugee camps that have absolutely no way to fend for themselves, that are just relying on the system. It's not just orphanization in general. It's refugee children who are orphans. That is a unique dehumanizing thing. And even if you want to grant them that, we still have the hundreds of thousands of deaths that we have that we've been pulling through this entire debate. So it's always going to solve that. That's not beneficial. Going on to the DA, once again, they drop us in the MO. They collapse out of this, and then they try to pull it back in the LOR. That's abusive. And so basically, like what they're saying, like, oh, we're going to be able to come to the table. There is no way, like my partner said, all the literature says that these talks aren't going to work anyway. So unless they can prove that these talks are going to work, they have absolutely nothing coming out of the DA. So they have absolutely nothing here except for the effects T. So let's look at the effects T because we already know that the app is winning on case. So first, this effects T right here, we said we meet, and they say that, like, no, they don't. That's not good enough analysis. They don't tell you why we don't meet. We're saying that we said, my partner said that landmines are an active part of this war, that this is part of like our military aid directly to them. They totally dropped this, and where they dropped the fact that landmines are a part of this war, an active part of this war, mind you, then they are granting us our we meet. So where you grant us our we meet, you can kick this team right out the door right there, because, oh, and then like their abuse, like, oh, they're saying now they're sending advisors. From my very first speech, I said that people will be sent over with the rats. Those people are there to advise with the rats. So the whole like, oh, well now they're sending people, that's not abusive whatsoever, because we've been saying that the entire time. Like my partner just defined it as like they're advisors to the rats. It's the advisors are the people going with the rats, which I articulated in my first speech. I said there are going to be people going with the rats. Those are the advisors. It's not abusive whatsoever, because I said there are going to be people going with the rats. Those people are the advisors that they're trying to say are abusive, but we always said that there would be people going to Syria. So first off, we meet, and like, their violation isn't even clear. The only violation that like we have here is
Point
that,
of
like,
order. Like,
okay, you can, oh, sorry.
so like this, all this doing, like she's about to start talking, she just started talking about how like our violation is like somehow like not sufficient enough, or it's too vague enough or something. This is the first time that their team has ever talked about the violation period.
You can,
And-
that it, oh, sorry.
Yeah, and like it didn't even come out in the MG, so no way. No way that's all.
You can grant that. I'll focus on interpretation standards and voters from here on out.
One will take.
Thank you.
Alright, so going on to the standards, they're saying that we dropped two of them, which isn't true. We make multiple responses out of the member speech. Our first response is actually, it goes to two of the standards, which one of them they're saying we dropped. The Times Magazine headline talks about Gambian rats, and the Huffington Post. That's two places, and we're saying that it's in the debate community. So first off, that kills their predictability right there. This is a case that has been run in the debate community many times this year. That is entirely predictable. People are talking about it. So two is like the common mind, where they they don't pull this through whatsoever, because like we're saying, this is being used, this is common usage in the debate community this year, right now. So then they say like, oh, literature, you're going to vote on literature. You're not going to vote on literature, because like, first off, there's no analysis on like what they mean by literature, so we're going to assume that they mean like the literature base. So that's what you're going to look at, is like the fact that the Times Magazine headline and the Huffington Post checks back for the literature standard. That works for both their predictability and their literature
Point of
standard.
order again, I'm so sorry guys. But like, they don't talk about the literature in the MG. Now she's trying to not only talk about it, she's trying to do cross-application of refutation against the predictability and common knowledge standard to this is all brand new cross-application. And she didn't even talk about it in the first place.
Your response?
My member articulated this on all of their standards. He said he cross-applied this to every single standard. He said, you can look at this for every standard.
Consideration. 45 seconds.
Okay, so and on top of that, in the letteration, he also said that like giving, they say like support on face, and we're saying like this is, we meet your interpretation, you're giving the rats. 4 on the ground explosion, they're like, oh, they're exploding their ground, because like their only like explosion of ground is the TV. Well, now that's gone, so like we're not exploding any ground. We're using like specific things like about death in the war. So they don't have any standards left. They only gave you 4 standards. Going on to the voters, where they say like education, my partner points out that more people are going to join because Gambian rats are freaking awesome, and like who doesn't want to be a part of Gambian rats? Like I hear that and I'm like, woo, like let's go, let's talk about some Gambian rats and wars. Like, so we're going to be getting more people join, and that's almost like a that basically takes out their entire voter on education right there, like, because they're saying like less people are going to join, so you're going to have less education because of that. No, that's not true whatsoever. You're going to have more people joining, which means that you're never going to have less education, just like you can flow through that response
Point
that
of
was
order.
responded to.
This is like 10 seconds over.
I did 2 seconds.
Point of order. Well, his timer ran like a while back.
2
The round is
seconds.
done, good job.
Yeah, thank you everyone. Everybody,
Vacate
get out,
the room, guys.
outside.
Vacate the room.